exactly is a bird? Well, seems easy enough. From an evolutionary standpoint, a bird is basically, a dinosaur with feathers that's still living. So when we look at all the existing reptiles out there, then we find that this branch is the dinosaurs, includes crocodiles, some of which are still living today, and the old dinosaurs went extinct. Now, some of them actually had feathers. Even T-Rex, it seems like, may have had feathers. And birds are essentially an offshoot of that branch. And so when people say dinosaurs are extinct, evolutionary biologists are quick to point out, nope, they're not. We still have the birds. So really the defining feature of birds is feathers. I mean, there's really not much else like it. Well, actually, there kind of is. Reptile scales that they probably evolved from, and hair, which is remarkably similar. They're all made out of this tough, lightweight protein known as keratin. And this obviously allows birds to fly, one of their primary functions. If you look at this little bird's wing, you notice that the bones inside only extend out to about here. And so the feathers allow for a lot more area in order to provide lift. So flight certainly not possible for birds, at least not in the way we know of it, without feathers. They may have first evolved for insulation, like these little chicks that are out on my patio right now. Look at those fluffy things. So they're not going to fly with those. There's kind of a weird variety called a frizzle, I guess, and their feathers curl. Not a very useful adaptation, but an interesting one nonetheless. So they were probably evolving as insulation, and that allowed the dinosaurs and birds to maintain their body heat by having that insulating layer of feathers, much like fur does for mammals. And now with a warmer body, they can speed up a lot of metabolic processes, which is pretty important. Allows them to go into different habitats as well. So not only flight, but insulation, really important characteristics. If you see a bird really puff up its feathers, it's kind of like getting goosebumps or seeing the hairs stand up on a dog's back. Some of that is just to trap air and basically put on a thicker coat. Now, feathers take quite a bit of maintenance. I mean, with birds relying on them so much, look at this intricate structure. It has this main rachis and then all these tiny little projections, each of which have other tiny projections. And a lot of those have hooks on them that link the feathers together. So birds spend a lot of time preening, and they will use their beak usually, if you see them in weird positions, spreading oil from the preening glands onto the feathers. This is like product, right? This is just how they maintain their feathers and keep them in good shape. Another thing they do is once or twice a year, birds molt. They get a whole new set of feathers. They look kind of ridiculous during this time frame, and different birds do it differently and for different reasons. It may allow them to blend into the habitat better, like ptarmigans, for example, turn white when they molt in the winter. Makes sense. And that just keeps their feathers in good shape. They really can't afford to do without their feathers. And then also attracting mates. A lot of times the males are pretty bold in coloration. Coloration is kind of a weird thing. A lot of times it has to do with the actual microscopic structure of the feathers themselves rather than pigments in there. But sometimes it is the pigments from the food they eat that produce that color. Well, I'm at it. It's not related to feathers, but in terms of flight, really important that birds are lightweight, right? Not all birds are super lightweight, if you think of a goose, but they still fly well. They're a lot lighter than other animals. And there's a couple other adaptations that go along with this lightweight, kind of getting rid of extra organs so that you can be light enough to fly. One of those is that they have done away with a urinary bladder. Why carry around a bunch of water? And then the other is to narrow things down to just one gonad, one ovary or one testis, so that they are not carrying around excess baggage, so to speak. It's kind of some interesting adaptations for flight, but feathers really make the bird. So birds have an internal skeleton, just like yours and mine. If you look at the arm bone of a person, it's actually pretty similar to the bones of a bird. That they have a humerus and a radius and an ulna, and their hand is really kind of strange because they don't pick things up. Their feet are a little more similar to ours than their hands certainly are. But one of the interesting things about their bones, and you may have heard this, is they're hollow. Ours are hollow, but they're filled with marrow, and birds actually have just completely hollow bones. So they're air spaces, and this actually forms part of their respiratory system. Air comes into the air spaces in these bones and travels back out through the lungs. So kind of a strange system there. The other big thing for flight is that birds have this really weird modified keel. It's a breastbone or sternum, which in us is flat, it's right over your heart there. But in theirs, it sticks out. If this were the same case in us, it would look like you had a dinner plate sized bone sticking right out of the middle of your chest. But that's obviously to attach those huge flight muscles to, and allows them to power flight. Really amazing thing. As much as we might dream of human powered flight, we would need to change quite a bit in order to have the strength that a bird does to fly. Now, when it comes to reproduction, how they say, birds do it, bees do it, and we get the birds and the bees, and they're actually really good parents. They need to be, and typically work cooperatively, at least many birds do. So, they have internal fertilization, just like a lot of other animals, so they mate. They lay eggs, which is a little bit different than at least most mammals, and they have that hard outer shell that you're familiar with if you've cracked an egg open. And that helps protect them and keeps the young nice and not only protected, but stays wet and allows for some gas exchange. Monogamy, just pairing of one female and one male, is not real common in the animal kingdom, but is fairly common in birds. And this is because their young need some cooperative care. So we see the female kestrel sitting on some eggs down here, and one looks like it's hatched, but she's going to need to get up and get food, stretch her wings, and the male will come and take over, and so on. There are sexual differences between males and females, and they often look really different. Not in all birds, but most of them, the male is really bright and showy because he has to show off. And with the kestrels here, even brings food to the females and tries to kind of woo them that way. And they have these elaborate courtship rituals where the male sort of proves his worth. The female often does the bulk of the work in most animals of raising young. And so if she's going to mate with a male and bother with raising young, she wants to know that that's a pretty strong male. And so he needs to prove his worth. And in birds, very often, there's this elaborate courtship ritual where the male can say, look, either I'm strong enough or humble enough to be this ridiculous. Wouldn't you like to raise chicks with me? So the greater sage grouse is one that has an interesting courtship ritual. We can see the males here and in their breeding plumage. And they make these weird calls and dance and everything for the females who sit there and look on. And the ones they're the most impressed with are the ones they mate with. Since a male will mate with several females, these guys don't actually help raising the young, but the females are very capable of doing that. A couple other interesting things about birds. Some, not all, but mostly the songbirds can actually see in 4 colors. So here we are, and we have 3 color detecting cones in our eyes that detect kind of red and green and blue. And so those are the 3 main colors we see. Insects, a little bit different, can see into the ultraviolet, which is kind of interesting. Otherwise, they're kind of similar to a couple of ours, but a really different sort of programming. Some of the songbirds can see a little more evenly spaced bunch of colors. Now, here's the kind of mind-boggling thing. So with our 3 detectors of colors, we can see well over 1 million colors and distinguish between them. Imagine what birds can do with 4. So the way that some birds see the world is not the way we see it. Same with bees and other insects. So they may actually be seeing what looks to us like a fairly plain display, really is quite vibrant. And the other and kind of last thing about birds that is rather remarkable is their voice. We always hear them singing, and if you try to imitate a bird call, uh, that is really difficult to do because we don't have the same equipment that they do. And so we'll work a little bit on uh, these sonograms, and they're basically a way to visualize the sound that a bird makes, which kind of helps because they are really complex. One of the things that birds have, and I've mentioned this a bit ago, is this really complex respiratory system where they have air sacs and lungs and hollow bones so that, and this is related to their need for powering flight, right? So this is a really, really energy intensive process. And so they need as much oxygen as possible. So they breathe in and that air travels around and then back through their lungs and on out. So it's this one-way flow, which actually allows them to get more oxygen. And this is partly powered by beating of their wings. So they don't necessarily have to have a separate muscle like we do in order to breathe. And they get a lot more air or oxygen out of every breath than we do. And that helps power flight along with a really large heart and a lot more myoglobin than we have that helps to power or store oxygen and power those muscles. Well, back to the song. So they have this amazing respiratory system. You know, singers and tuba players have big lungs. Well, birds do too, and they can power a lot of singing. And at the sort of meeting where their 2 lungs come together, the 2 bronchi, they have something similar to our voice box or our larynx, but it's called a syrinx, and they can produce sounds out of both of these. So they can actually produce a sound here and a different sound over here, which makes for some really complex songs, things that we just absolutely cannot do. If you've spent any time around wetlands, you no doubt have heard the red-winged blackbird song, and it really demonstrates that syrinx quite well and their amazing abilities to make calls that we just cannot. So let me play one for you, see if it sounds familiar. Uh, well, that's it, and I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about what makes a bird and uh, these amazing creatures that are just so accessible but so different from us.